Hello, everyone. I'm Pavna Thur, founder of Shenomics, a platform to help women live and lead from within. Today's Shenomics Mentor Chat is about the power of networking or effective ways to network with our guest mentor, the very lovely Aparna Vedapuri Singh. Thank you for joining us, Aparna. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me, Bhavna.
Okay, wonderful. Well, let me first of all just give a quick introduction on Aparna for those of you who are not familiar with Aparna. So she's the chief editor and founder of Women's Web, which I really do believe is one of the best places in India today to go for intelligent writing on women's issues by women for women. And in addition to the wonderful online platform that Women's Web has, they're also now venturing into a host of offline activities, including the creation of a Women's Web network, which allows women to network. So I thought Aparna would be absolutely the best person to talk to about the power of networking. So Aparna, let's dig right into this wonderful topic.
Yeah.
So let's begin with defining networking. I think we all have an understanding of what networking is, but I'd love to hear from you in your words. How do you see networking?
Right. The technical definition of networking is, of course, that it's about interacting with people who can help you meet your professional or any other kind of goals. But I think I'd like to actually talk about what networking isn't, because
Mm,
all of us sort of have an understanding of what it is. But I think it's important to remember that when we talk about professional or any other kind of goals that we want to achieve about networking, we are not talking short term goals here. So it's important to remember that. And networking is not about a sales pitch, it's not about a job search. And those are worthy goals in themselves. It's not that they aren't. But that's not what networking is about. So,
mm.
networking is really about long term goals and reaching out to people who, in some way, can help you meet those long term goals whose own goals may be complementary.
Okay, great, great. I'm glad you made the distinction about what it is and it isn't. So I'd love to hear more about what you feel are the benefits of networking, which again, I think for those of us who are big proponents of the idea of networking, they may seem fairly obvious or fairly straightforward. But I know there are a lot of myths or misconceptions around networking, and a lot of women for whatever reason have an aversion to the idea, either the idea of networking because they see it as perhaps as opportunistic or inauthentic and don't always feel comfortable with the idea of networking. So in
Right.
your opinion, what do we, what do you say to all women in terms of why networking is something that all of us should be seriously looking at?
Right. So yes, as you said, networking is sometimes seen as opportunistic. But to me, one of the biggest benefits of networking, which is often undervalued, is really the potential for you to learn from it. And this learning could be anything: exposure to new ideas, exposure to new opportunities, because we also need to remember that a lot of opportunities that women miss out on come from informal channels. Who so and so companies looking out for a vendor in this area, or they have a job opening, or in your own company, the CEO is planning to move on to a global role, and hence, that role is going to be vacant. This sort of news, before it comes on to formal channels, very often goes through informal channels, what we call the grapevine. And if you're not networking, you can't access the grapevine. So you don't hear of these opportunities. It's also a great way to just learn about something new that's happening in your industry, something that's happening in a parallel industry that you could adapt in your own business. So I think, first of all, the learning benefits of networking are often hugely undervalued. Like I said in the beginning, it's not so much about getting that job now, or it's not just about that, but how it gives you perspectives that could help you in your career on a long term basis. So that is one. Secondly, specifically coming to women, research proves that women are often promoted or not promoted based on their track record, whereas men are more often promoted for their potential. What bosses see as what you can do in the future and not just what you've done in the past. So that is a huge drawback for women. And while some of that comes from gender bias and so on, what is it that we can do about it? How do you communicate your potential? So networking is a great way to communicate potential and not just track record, so that others can evaluate you, especially in your own company, based on what you will bring to the table in the future and not just what you have done.
Hmm.
So I think these are two very important benefits: the learning and the communicating potential, both of which can happen through networking.
True, absolutely. I completely agree with you, and it also gives women that uh, that visibility, which is so important for us, because, like you said, we're not always. Sometimes we shy away from promoting ourselves, or we have we're not always comfortable with making ourselves visible, making our work visible. But in today's day and age, like you said, that's the way to get your ideas known, get your work known, and it just helps in both professional setting, or whether it's corporate work or entrepreneurial
Absolutely.
scene. Absolutely. Okay, great. So I'd love to hear from you what you feel are the most effective ways to network, because all of us, I think, time is we all have limited amount of time, and networking isn't just about showing up at an event and handing out business cards. It's a lot more than that. So how do we make sure we can really effectively leverage the networks that we belong to?
Right. So I think a big part of that is being clear about why you're networking. So, what do you want to get out of it? Do you want to expand your presence within your industry? Are you looking for people who can make a case for you in your own company? In which case, you should probably looking more at networks within your own company and not outside, not as much outside. On the other hand, if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for referrals, then that will impact the kind of networks you go to. So I think first of all, looking at what is your goal, why are you networking, and that could be different at different points in time. For instance, when you start up in the first year of business, could be very different from 5 years down the line. Similarly, when you're a line manager to when you're a business head, could be very very different. So keep reevaluating that, and as long as your goals are clear, I think you will use your time most productively. Again, especially women face a severe shortage of time, given that women still tend to have a double burden at work and home, which is lesser so for men. So it becomes all the more important for us to be very very selective about where we network.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I really like the idea of first getting clear on why it is that you are networking. And I think if that is clear, then that makes it so much easier to identify how do I get the most out of the various networks that I could be a part of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, great. And would you say there are any differences that one should keep in mind when networking in a women's only group versus, let's say, a mixed group?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked because I'm just going to narrate a small anecdote. So I recently attended an event for marketing professionals and entrepreneurs, and with a very high proportion of entrepreneurs, and I noticed a significant difference between the way the women at the event and the men at the event presented themselves. So when I met men, men clearly told me, I'm so and so, and I do X, and my company is the biggest, brightest, largest, most, revolutionary, whatever, whatever. And almost all the women started with, "What is it that you do?" And again, there were clear differences in the amount of time that women spoke about themselves and men spoke about themselves. So on the one hand, of course, it's great that most women are good listeners. We're trained to listen well. But on the other hand, sometimes we listen so much that we forget to talk about ourselves. So I think one important difference to keep in mind when at a mixed group is that you will meet a lot of men who are unlikely to ask you that question, what is it that you do? I noticed that, 8 out of 10 men I spoke to never asked me about myself. I mean, this might come across as a little bit of a generalization, but I'm speaking from experience here. So, unless you go in with some kind of I hesitate to say prepared speech, but at least you should have something in mind about what is unique about you and what you're doing in the context of that particular industry or networking event. And be prepared to talk about it even if the other person doesn't ask you, because very often men are conditioned to first talk about themselves and not necessarily ask you about yourself. So no one's going to give you an opening to talk, you just need to take it. So whereas in women only groups, I find that the atmosphere is a lot more mutual, more supportive. Women tend to ask each other, women tend to listen more to each other. So that's probably a difference that we do need to keep in mind at mixed events.
Absolutely. And I like the tip you had about being somewhat prepared before going to, let's say, if it is a mixed group event, having some kind of elevator pitch, whatever you want to call it, but
Yeah.
just having a way to be able to clearly articulate what it is that you do and how does that make you unique, and not being afraid to express it when you are, no matter who you're speaking with.
Yeah.
Um,
That holds true for all kinds of events, even if you were at a women only event.
yeah.
But chances are that a woman would create a natural opening for you to speak by asking you to talk about yourself.
Right, right, absolutely. And so speaking of men, when we look at professional settings, again, corporate or entrepreneurial, we always see these old boys clubs or old boys networks because men historically have been very comfortable in building these networks. They're very good at coming together, banding together, helping one another. And it can be quite intimidating or difficult for women to break into these networks. And it is important for us to be able to do that. Otherwise, we're never going, especially in male dominated fields, if we want to rise in those fields. So, what would you say are some of the ways in which we can break into these old boys networks?
Um, so here, of course, there are things that women can do, but I think it's important really for employers and event organizers to first step up and start creating more inclusive spaces, because it's not possible for individual women to do all the work of breaking through themselves. So starting with having spaces, for instance, why are so many panels all male? Have panels where you have more women on the platform. Look at your event timings. Are you making it impossible for employees who have a life beyond work to attend? So these are some of the ways in which employers can certainly make things more inclusive to begin with. Over and above that, there are things that as women we can do to ease our entry into these networks. Certainly, it helps to go prepared. So, for instance, I'm not a very extroverted person myself. I find it, so I'm not somebody who's a natural networker. So I know that's a problem that a lot of women face. So one of the things that I do when I go to events where I know that there are people likely to be a lot more senior to me, either in terms of age, which is also a factor in the Indian context. So what I do typically is I do a little bit of homework on the speakers, on the panelists, or any other attendees. And today one can often get access to that sort of thing via social media. So I do some research on people at the event that I would like to meet. So I don't necessarily aim to talk to everybody at the event because that can be very intimidating, and then you end up not talking to anybody. So I kind of set a goal for myself. I write down 3 names on a slip of paper and carry it with me and say, okay, these are 3 people I will have made contact with at the end of the event. And I think that can be very useful because then you have a certain goal that at this event I will connect with X, Y, and Z. And that's a start because you're not going to crack through the network, old boys network, all at one go. You're going to do it step by step. So part of doing that is finding out who is it that is most valuable to you from a long term perspective, making sure at the end of the event you have connected with those three people.
Hmm. Again, so it sounds like the theme is one has to, the more prepared you are, or the more homework you do before you show up at an event, the easier it is.
Yes.
And I like the idea of doing research or doing some background search on the people you want to connect with. This way, you can also identify some of the points on which you can connect with them. So maybe you share a hobby in common. Maybe you both love running, so you can strike up a conversation about running or something similar. I think then that really, because if we go with just a blank slate, it
Right.
becomes a little intimidating. But if we have, make notes beforehand in terms of, okay, these are the three people we want to meet, and this is how I can start a conversation or bring up in a conversation, I think that
Yeah.
makes it easier. So I completely agree with you there.
Yeah.
Great. So and what would you say? I mean, because when we look around today, there's so many networks. So how do we sort of filter down and decide what is the best network for us to be a part of? So how do we determine if a network is a good fit for us? What are some of the things we should be looking at?
Right. So I think we already spoke about some of it in terms of your goals. What
Mm-hmm.
are you looking at from networking? So and aligning it with that. The second thing I would probably like to talk about is what not to look for in a network. So a network is not necessarily about a great network for you is not necessarily about your initial comfort levels. So going back to what we spoke about, many industries still tend to be heavily male dominated. So, for example, I mean, this is just an example. You might be the only woman in a room, or you might be one of very few women in a room. So that may not be very comfortable to begin with, depending on your own disposition. But that doesn't mean it's not a good network for you if it's helping you meet your professional goals. So one of the things I would say is that if a network is filled with people who are likely to help you on your professional journey in some way, don't let initial discomfort come in the way of pursuing it. So persist with it. Maybe don't do it once. Go for two or three of those kinds of events. And of course, if there is still something that makes you deeply uncomfortable, then it's not a good fit for you. But it's worthwhile making at least a couple of attempts before you decide that. The second thing you could probably look at is what other people in your industry or with similar businesses are doing. What kinds of events are they attending, or what kinds of networks are they part of? This is a good indicator, but it need not, be a sort of must do. So their goals could be different, but I think it's a useful pointer that if a lot of people in your industry or company or kind of business are going in for certain kinds of networks, there's likely to be something valuable about it.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, so let's make all this advice actionable. So for women who are perhaps new to networking, or maybe not, or maybe just feel shy about networking,
Right.
what's the easiest way for them to begin networking today? Like, what's the smallest action someone who's watching this could take to begin their journey of networking?
I think the easiest, simplest way is simply to team up with a friend and go. So,
Mm,
if you're a shy person, scared of walking into a room alone where you don't know anybody, ask a friend to accompany you. Spend the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the event with your friend, moving around as a duo, then branch out. I mean, don't spend the entire event just talking to your friend because that kind of defeats the purpose.
I like that because that's sometimes the one thing that holds us back from going to an event. The thought of, oh my god, I'm not going to know anyone there. So if you go with a friend, it just you're so much more relaxed, and I guess it becomes easier to then strike up a conversation with others as well.
Yes, but remember that you're not there to spend time with your
Yes.
friend. There are plenty of other opportunities to do that.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Great. Now, Aparna, I'd also love to hear. I know you're building up this women's web network. I'd love to hear from you. What is it about? Why should women consider joining? What could be some of the benefits? Yeah, just tell us some about it.
So, Bhavna, Women's Web has been in the online space for 5 years now. The goal has always been to be a supportive space where women can come and find, in a sense, a reflection of themselves, women like themselves, talking about the issues that matter to us in real life. So that's what we've been doing online. And we've repeatedly heard from our community that, why don't we extend this into the, real world, so to say. So it's really something that's emerged organically out of that because we saw so much of interest amongst our own readers in connecting beyond online because I think there is still a lot of value to face to face interactions and with other women who are going through similar challenges whom you could learn from. And like I said, women's networks are often incredibly supportive networks. They're not just competitive, or they're not just about bragging about yourself. You find a genuine sense of warmth and support at these places. So that's how the Women's Web Network has come about, and this is something that we recently launched, and it's an entirely community-driven initiative. So in each city, Women's Web readers or long-time contributors are taking it ahead to run small groups of women. And again, small groups, there's a certain value. There is a different perspective, or to meeting up in a large event, but very small groups can actually work closely with each other. So the idea is that these groups, and so far we've started them in Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore, but we will be starting other cities soon as well. And a local, women's web contributor or long-time reader typically leads these sessions, and it acts as a venue for women to come together, and each session deals with a particular aspect of work or work life, or something that is relevant to your growth in the professional space.
Okay, wonderful. Well, for everyone who's watching this, I strongly encourage you to check out the Women's Web Network. We'll put a link underneath this video for anyone who's interested in learning more. And like Aparna said, I'm sure it will be very beneficial for any woman at any stage in her career or her life right now. It would be helpful to meet, like you said, those like minded women and start building that support network that could be helpful to you personally and professionally. So wonderful. Great. Well, Aparna, thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful tips with us. They're very practical, very useful. And like you said, networking is something I think that every woman should be looking at seriously today to help her get ahead. So thank you so much. It was really lovely chatting with you. And I wish you all the best with this Women's Web Network.
Thank you, Bhavna.
Okay, great.